listening to Second Wind with Joyce Buford, where women who are ready to expand their life adventure discover the tools to stop playing small and tap into the courage required to enjoy their second wind. Welcome. Good afternoon or morning or wherever you are. It is so good to know that you're out there listening to Second Wind again today. You know, this podcast was created for you. When you go through those times that are so traumatic and life-changing, that's when you need to hear a voice, no matter where that voice comes from. Second Wind was created for you. I'm here to encourage you to play full out, to be present, to open yourself up to knowing who you are, and to know that there are bigger dreams out there for you, waiting for you to become aware of, to explore, to have that growth. Now, as you know, all of my guests have gone through their transitions in life. Transition is part of life. So it was my dream when I created Second Wind that we would have so many resources that could support you, because I believe we cannot do it alone. We must have connection and we must have support. That's why you're here. So I thank you for being here today, because this is another day of growth. Now, my guest today has a fascinating story of transition. I'm calling it transition. He's going to tell us that story, but let me tell just a little bit about you. Let me open the curtain just a little bit here and tell you a little bit about Kevin Krenitsky, MD. In 2015, he began the process of withdrawing from constant focus on external experiences, of working to obtain more money, more status, etc. After his position as Chief Commercial Officer at Foundations Medicine, FMI, successfully ended, he continued to work as the president of a small biotech company for a year and a half. But the pull inside him was too great. In 2017, he and his wife sold their home and moved down to Southwest Florida, where they arranged their lives around time pursuit of spirituality. That is his story, and how he made that transition is ahead of us. And so I welcome you, Kevin, because I'm looking forward to finding out about that. From going from the peak to going to another peak, but totally different.
Thank you, Joyce. Lovely to be here.
So you spoke in your book. Now, you are an author, and you spoke in your book. You've created this book of your journey of the spiritual journey that you took. And why would you share with us what, having reached such a high success rate, or what most people would say is a success rate, because you got money, you got position, you got fame. Why was it that wasn't totally fulfilling to you?
Yeah, I was miserable.
Don't mince words here.
No, I think it's simply true. Despite doing all of the things that the world encourages us to do, right, to be happy, I did those things. I was very, very much on board with the world's message to go out and get, explore experience in every possible way, get an education, make money, get a job, get a title, and have a relationship, all of those things. And I think from the standpoint of the world, I fulfilled that, and yet was completely unfulfilled. There was, a lifetime of anxiety, worry, suffering. It was a conflict in relationships. It was just, it certainly had not done the job. And at a certain point, this little willingness to kind of question that paradigm that the world had put before me, this materialist paradigm of seeking and getting more. It just it came about, and that really led, at that point, after that point, things kind of fall into your lap in terms of where you go and how you take that journey. But it was clearly suffering that was self-imposed. And I was the one responsible for that, not something out there in the world or some other person or some situation.
Well, sometimes we have those worries and frets, as you mentioned. They stem from our childhood. I mean, we're kind of carrying them with us, as a big bag on our back. So is there anything that was just really the cause, or you felt was the cause in so much pain and worry in your day?
Yeah, I think that the cause of anyone's ultimate pain or worry is this belief in separation, is the belief in being a separate, isolated individual, believing that you are the body and you are the mind. You have a belief in this ego self that was created. And when we have this sense of separation, and when we live as what we feel and believe to be, an isolated individual in a foreign world, everything else is other. And there's a great amount of fear and grief that are generated from that. And we suppress that down, and that's always there. And that, so that sense of separation, it was recognized that sense of separation had to be seen as not real. Ultimately, to actually get rid of the fear and the anxiety that sense causes.
Was that feeling alone? You were alone? Or what do you put more definition on that separation?
Most of us, on this planet, we take ourselves to be our conditioned selves. We, in other words, we believe that our identity is our mind, our body, our thoughts, our feelings, our body. And because we believe that is our identity, then we get into this, we get into the fear of death and the fear of lack. We don't recognize that what we truly are, what I call the still point in the book, is really, and the still point is just a word, but this is our self-aware being. This is the aspect of ourselves in which the experiences of the body and the world come and go, but we don't come and go. That presence remains. It remains before thought, it remains during thought, it remains after thought. And we don't see that clearly. And as a result of that, we live with that fear and that anxiety around those limitations that the body and the mind have.
Right. I want to talk to you about a defining moment. Now, we all have multiples, okay? Some of them are big, some of them are not. I call that a transition, a fork in the road. And then you make a decision about, do I want to stay in this pain or don't I want to stay in this pain? Am I living a full life? Am I not living a full life? And so I ask you, was there any defining moment like that for you, or was this a transition that just kind of continued? And
yeah, that's a beautiful question. I mentioned in some place, I don't know that I specifically talk about it in the book, but it's in some of the material that's been out there. I had after we had moved to Florida, I was taking anti-anxiety medicine for 27 years or so.
Oh my gosh.
And was clearly using it every day, not abusing it but using it, and obviously could not. The brain gets very, very used to that, and you don't just put that aside. And in coming down here, I was sitting on a couch one day, had pretty much cut back on the medicine maybe too fast. I don't recommend anybody do that. By the way, you do things like this under the close, careful supervision of your healthcare professional. But being that I probably was a little cocky, having an MD, I stopped half of it, and then maybe a month or two later went through a lot of anxiety, stopped all of it. And one day, just kind of sitting on the couch, this tremendous amount of anxiety and fear, and even kind of self-loathing and just grief were present. And it was clear enough at that point that moving away from this was not the answer. I wasn't going to take a pill to relieve it. I wasn't going to get up and move. And it was to sit there in what felt like this complete utter agony of mind, and a complete failure of anything and everything. And the mind just kind of dissolved and dropped away. And in that instant, which is a timeless instant, this still point, this self-aware being was recognized, and it instantly, in a sense, resolved the decade or more of this kind of spiritual journey that I was on, in terms of concepts and words, and all of this was resolved in that silence. And so from that point on, then it really becomes this never-ending and ongoing realignment of how we live, how we feel, how we relate, to others, to be in line with that recognition. And that's ongoing. That is a process that certainly, that doesn't, certainly for me, hasn't ended. I don't think it has an ending. So in a sense, it's the recognition itself is a timeless recognition outside of time, but then that reintegration process occurs in our lives moving forward.
Yeah. You speak about the still point, which is the title of your book, which has wonderful raves about it, and which I want to read some of those quotes, because you have some great references to your book. Congratulations. But you talk about the still point. Was it indeed a point, or was it a phase?
The word still point is a word that came about 5 years prior to writing the book. I was sitting down one day and doing, what we call meditation. I was in meditation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea came up that a book called The Still Point would be written. And the still point is really just another word for the ground of our being, the ground of all being. And it's been called by many things, by many spiritual traditions throughout the ages. Presence, Holy Spirit, the Tao, the now, the face of God. It goes on and on and on. So the still point is simply a word that, like any word, points to the wordless silence that is our true being, in our true nature. Mm-hmm. So I will say it's interesting though, because I don't know. I when I first started to actually write the book, I kind of tried to not use that word, and it didn't really work. It seemed like that's the word that, for whatever reason, this expression wanted to take. So I surrendered to it, of course, and let it go, and it worked out. It's interesting though, because you mentioned a point, and a point is quite unique because it doesn't have any dimensions. It's essentially dimensionless, and this consciousness, or pure consciousness, our aware being, is also dimensionless. It has no limitations to it. So it's not a bad word. It's at least a decent pointer to that which ultimately no words apply to.
Yes. Well, I just, the still point, and I apologize, I have not read your book, but it will be on my list. But the point kind of makes me think of a thunderbolt that came down and struck you and took possession. And so I kind of wondered if it was a moment like that or not.
it's interesting because it's really not an experience. It's the absence of experience. In other words, there was a tremendous amount of experience. There were sensations in the body that felt like the body would explode, the heart would explode. There's grief and fear and anxiety. This is a tremendous storm of mind, a storm of experience. But when the mind dissolves, all the experience resolves. So it is not an experience, so to speak. It is the simple being without which no experience could happen. It's that knowing of experience. So in a sense, I have to clarify that because it isn't actually an experience, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes. You mentioned fear, but you also mentioned another powerful word, and I think that's grieving. Grieving, and I will share with you an experience. After the first of the year, I had two important people in my life die within a month. Not unusual. After these 2 years, a lot of people had that. But how it affected me is I had never experienced grief. Never. And it just did similar, I'm thinking, to what you might have experienced. It just shook my world. And I sat down and I said, oh, okay, what do I want to keep? What don't I want to keep? And I decided really taking a look at me. Now, I think everybody needs that grief because it gets rid of all that we have, all the misconceptions we learned from society and said, it's maybe not working for you. But it was those two deaths that really taught me grief and shook me so much that I could move.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The experience of grief, as I mentioned before, it's part and parcel with this belief in separation and this belief in being a separate individual unit, if you will, and it is part of that. And the only ultimate resolution to that is to see that we are not separate and have that resolved. And that comes, as you said, from turning the spotlight inward, from going in, going in and recognizing that aspect of us that does not come and go, and seeing that aspect of us, it wasn't born, it doesn't die, and it doesn't lack anything. And with time, it becomes somewhat undeniable, and our focus of identity, our identity shifts more and more to that, away from the conditioned ego structures, away from the body and the mind. The body and the mind are experiences within that, and they're fully and truly appreciated and enjoyed. But it isn't our identity. So yeah, it's a beautiful way to put it.
So I feel more clarity about me. Do you feel more clarity about yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The recognition of self over time. Again, as you abide in it over and over again, your identity begins to shift. The true self comes more to the forefront. Prior to that, we were exclusively focused on experiences and how we think, how we feel, what we see, taste, smell, touch. All of these things, which are wonderful and beautiful. The world of the senses, but this recognition of self, or this recognition, becomes a realization. It becomes a realization that what you are is truly unlimited, and it is shared by all. It is shared by all beings.
Yeah. Here's a quote from one of your the Ayurveda. Heather Johnson hosted Ayurveda Life School podcast. She said this about you: which you've already read, I think. Every once in a while, a book comes along that has the potential to change your life forever if you will but read and apply the teachings. The Still Point by Kevin Krenitsky is that book. Nice, nice.
Yeah, it was surprising, and of course, lovely to see that it's resonated with some people, and that's great. It's really all that it's all one could hope for.
Right. I think after what we have gone through over the last 2 years and all the cruelty that's going on all over the world, and even my community, which I think is a lovely community in East Texas, people are driving more aggressively, people have short tempers, and I find that so many of us are trying to find that spirituality, that place of peace. We're just tired, we're worn out, and yet we are confronted by these people all the time. So how does your book address some of what we've gone through?
Yeah, the book pretty consistently points everyone back to their own recognition of self. Because when we start to get into things like the events that are happening in the world, or judging events as good or bad, we're somewhat back out there to taking the power away. The only power that we have is to really change ourselves. And we want to change the world. We want to change what's on the screen of the world, but that doesn't work, because the only true choice we have is the choice to recognize ourself. And in recognizing ourself, we recognize the self of all. We free kind of the self of all. And in that regard, then the way you interpret what's happening on the screen becomes completely different. And that ultimately is the only thing that will work.
Right. So in your journey, did your journey take you to religion or faith, or what was your journey?
Well, I grew up as a traditional Catholic, Greek Catholic background, Roman Catholic background later than that. And so, certainly religion was a part of it, and maybe not a serious, not that serious of a part. However, when these questions started to happen 16, 17 years ago, I delved back into that really and said, I'm going to apply myself. I'm going to see, if the answers are there. And unfortunately, a lot of the Western religions are belief systems, and that can provide solace and comfort to some people, and if that's where they're at, that's wonderful. But the belief systems themselves didn't supply for me the ending of the fear or the anxiety and these questions and this suffering. The answers ultimately can never be found in a belief system. It has to become an experiential, felt understanding. So we move away from belief or faith into that experiential understanding of self, which is in the now, which is always now. It wasn't good enough to put off happiness or peace until after death, as I was being told by by some of those religions. It seemed like there was a better solution to that.
Oh, okay. So tell us what your life is like now.
Well, with the recognition, what happens is, and this, just by the way, on the religion point, this does not in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing that I'm saying, nothing in the book that is asking someone to believe in something. It's not trying to change someone's beliefs or say, give this up or give that up. But I would prefer that there is, don't believe a word I say. If you can experience the peace of the self through the book in your own experience, wonderful. That's wonderful. But so I just want to make sure I clarify that, because it's in no way a judgment of any belief system or any path that anyone is on.
Right.
So in terms of the question, life is lived in the now. It's lived without being reactionary. In other words, we recognize that when we act and interact, a lot of times we're just acting from memory, from reaction. And we're acting from these conditioned egoic patterns of belief and behavior we've had, our entire life. And when that begins to get broken down, there's an availability that occurs. And reactions are fresh. There are no preconceived notions. Interactions rather are fresh without reactivity that you previously had. So the result of that is you live life in the now, and it's much more peaceful, and happiness, which is your native state, kind of moves to the forefront, and more.
Yeah. Yes, I believe as well as you that once we get rid of all of that baggage of grief, fret, worry, then the human spirit is really made for happiness. I mean, that's where we are. That's where we were to be. So
yeah, it's happiness itself. The still point is peace and happiness itself. Those are its qualities. So in a sense, as you said, it's not finding anything new. It's simply clearing away, the thick amount of clouds that have obscured that being, which is peace and happiness itself.
Oh, I like that. Say that again sometime, because it is true. I like that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's all the other stuff, the smog we have to clear away,
Yeah.
that prevents us from having that happiness. Yeah. So how does that happiness play out in your life? So do you like, now that are you in working, or are you enjoying life in leisure?
I still do, I still do some things in business. I sit on a board. I have advised some companies, maybe not not recently, but have none of this is, that's not incompatible with this at all. As you know, in fact, whatever you do, you're more present and you do it more effectively, because it's coming from, it's not tainted by conditioning or preconceived notions, or the idea of always end gaining or gaining something in the future. So your effectiveness can kind of really increase. And of course, with writing the book over the past year, 2 years, and now really speaking about this has been something that I've been doing, and it's been really fun. It's been great to talk to people and to see some people resonate with this. And I think that the world, in many ways, it's my intuition that many people are, as you said, are turning inward, are starting to see that society and the world is not necessarily what we thought it was. And it's a good time for, I think, a lot of these teachings to be out there. So, certain people can resonate with certain of them.
Okay, I have 2 questions. First question is, did you find that the people, once you became peaceful and happy, it became more of a reality in your life? Did you find that in choosing the people you had friendships with, the people you sought out to be with, changed?
About 5 years ago, when I had kind of quit working full time and we moved to Florida and really just started to contemplate.
You got to start over anyway.
Yeah. It in certain ways, friendships and stuff. I wouldn't say they fell away, but maybe on hold, in that I wasn't engaging with anyone as much. But I think in reality, just since coming kind of back out, and after writing the book and now engaging and doing this, I've reconnected with a lot of beautiful, wonderful friends that I've had in the past, and certainly made a lot of new friends as well. But Yeah, there's definitely, without any question in day-to-day life, I think, you meet people and people are there for you. You can be there for them, and there's a synergy in all of it. There's without a doubt a synergy, but it hasn't been as much a discarding things, from the past. Of course, few things do fall away. There are people, situations, things that you wouldn't. I just have no interest anymore. That's a normal part of
Right.
I think of any process.
Yeah, I think transitions in friends is important sometimes. Definitely, if we have taken a transition, that they're friends that don't quite keep our same values, they and being with them can make us uncomfortable and agitated. And I think, and maybe it's not that way for men, but I do know for women, we have a hard time fading away, pushing away from relationships, even though they don't work for us. Men may have a little easier time at that than we do. But the other question I wanted to ask you is about writing the book. Now, I think everybody should write a book of their life. I really do. I think it's a great way to open yourself up, to find your emotions, to have inner growth. How did you find this experience? How did you start? And what made you start?
Yeah. After that experience we talked about, or non-experience, the questions, these type of questions that eventually showed up in the book, or questions very much like these, were questions that I was asking myself every day, and truly looking at the mechanisms, and truly trying to understand and come to them from a place of this understanding. So it was really living this. It was not something that there was no satisfaction in having an intellectual understanding of this. The satisfaction only came from seeing it in my day-to-day life, in seeing the relationships improve, all of that. So these questions were continually being investigated, and eventually, 4 or 5 years after that, it just kind of felt like it was time to sit down and just put it together. And it came together. It came together in a way that had no expectation, had no. There were days where I would sit down and I would open the laptop or open the Mac, and 2 hours later I'd close it. There wouldn't be a single word. It was more just sitting quietly and seeing seeing what kind of came up. And other days, these questions that I had, they formulate, and then you'd answer the question and you'd write a little bit. So the process was, in terms of anything doing, it was really a happening. It just seemed to happen. So it was very kind of easy and peaceful, and yeah.
Right. Well, it was quite interesting in going back to that time that I went through the grief. I had a friend. Now I'm a coach, okay, and but sometimes it takes an outside to say, "Okay, Joyce, why don't you write?" And I so I sat down and did what you just explained, and it was amazing how beneficial that whole process is in helping people touch themselves, to understand themselves, to accept themselves. And what comes out is, oh my gosh, did you have childhood things and memories? Do you have memories like that in your book, or are they all around your transition?
So the book is, again, it's written. There's a little bit of an explanation as every chapter starts, and then it goes into kind of questions and answers around it, around that particular topic a little bit. And it's more of when the recognition of self happens, as you move towards realization, memories and the past play less and less of a role, if you will. That conditioning kind of begins to slow down because it's not given attention anymore. You spend more time living now. You live in the now moment, and which is the only moment you ever have. In that regard, it's not as much about memory as having freedom, as recognizing that your true self has freedom from those memories, so to speak, more and more progressively over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did you learn through this journey? What did you learn? I know you say the freedom, but is there any one takeaway that you would have from this journey? The spirituality, yes.
Yeah. The takeaway is that our being, our self, what we are fundamentally, our true nature, is ever present, and it doesn't lack anything. And that being is shared by all. All sentient creatures share that being, that one being that is whole. That's the takeaway. Because when you see that, that's the experience of love in relation to others. And from that recognition, actions follow. You will act in a way that is in accordance with that. And you're non-judgmental, all of the play of things that happen in the world don't make much sense. War, there's one being. So when we see that, we're able to more and more act in accordance with that recognition.
So your relationships are more peaceful and loving.
Yeah, when you recognize that our being is shared and we are the same being, there's a recognition of self in others. So that's love. It doesn't mean that you get along with everyone. It doesn't mean that you will like those who have similar personalities, similar interests. There's some connection. There's energetic or chemistry, if you will, whatever words you want to use to that. But regardless of who you spend your time with and who you like, and there's a love for all beings, and that really then redefines the way that you act and react and live in the world in accordance with that.
Okay, Kevin. I'm trying to think about that person I don't like. And you're saying.
No, it doesn't mean that you're going to like everybody. It means that the core, their awareness, is the same as your awareness. Their mind is completely different. Your mind is different. The way you think, the way you feel, your history, your memories are different. The way you act can be different. But that which knows it, the still point, is the same. And that's the experience of love. When you love an other or a pet, you recognize yourself in them. You see that you are the same at the deepest level. That's the felt experience of love. That's actual love, not wanting something from somebody or lusting for someone. It's that deeper recognition. And when we recognize our being, the still point, our self-aware being, we also recognize everyone's being in that.
I'm going to have to think on that, Kevin.
or don't think about it. Actually, don't think about it, because this isn't something that the mind can acquire. It's not information that you can add. It's about seeing that place in you from which thoughts and which mind arise.
Okay. All right. What else would you like to share with my audience?
I thought that was really, really, really lovely. I suppose I should, the book is The Still Point. It's available online. You can, there's a website, author Kevin Krenitsky.com.
You might spell Krenitsky for them.
Krenitsky.
Yes.
Also Amazon, of course, or Books and Books, or, I just did we had a virtual afternoon today with Books and Books in Miami, which is a beautiful independent bookstore, and had a virtual signing with another guy. Yeah, it was really nice. So it's nice to support those outlets as well, but it's available.
Yes. I looked. You can go to Amazon. It's right there. I didn't notice it. No. Well, I went to your website, of course. But so it's been interesting to have you on the show, because you've introduced some ideas that are huge, and yet they're not, in that the spiritual, the point, the still point. Maybe I'm going to really get that only by reading that book. Right?
The words are only pointers as well. So if you read it slowly and go to the felt experience of where the words point, that which knows those words and those thoughts that you have. That's the still point itself, and its recognition is very, very important. Very important, not only for ourselves, but for the world as a whole.
Very good. Well, I'm really proud that you were able to make that transition. I think this world is way, 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 way too full of expectations, false expectations. And I see us struggling with it, particularly in our children. And I appreciate the growth that you've had. It's really beautiful to see, and I look forward to reading about it as well. So
Wonderful.
I thank you very much for being on the show today. This has been great and growth. So I wish you well on your journey.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your journey.
Thanks.
Now, listeners out there, you know what I always ask you every week is share this. There are people out there hurting that need an answer, and this is an answer. So I ask that you pass this on through your community, through your social media, whatever. Let them know about the message that you've heard today from Kevin. And also, well, your assignment this week is just to remember that inside you, there is a person of love and caring. And maybe reading the book will help you get there. So I thank you so much for listening today, for being present with us. And I hope you have a fantastic week and that you'll come back next week for Second Wind. Thank you. Goodbye.
Joyce Buford returns next week at the same time for another edition of Second Wind. Through the Joyce Buford Empowerment System, women are receiving the support they need through their transitions and are able to reclaim their true purpose with confidence. They receive the tools they need to map out new lives. You can find out more about her coaching services at joycebufordempowers.com.